Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Slegaitis-Smith and this is a channel where we like to talk about writing, learning, and creating. Thank you very much for joining me today. This is our very first creating video. My dream for this section of the channel is that it would become something that the community we're building here would be able to participate in. It would be tutorials of me showing you how to create different projects, and eventually, once there is interest, hopefully some live streams where we actually get to create projects all together at the same time. So for our first video, we're going to get in with something super easy that you can do without having to go out to the art store or whatever store to buy supplies for. What I'm going to be showing you how to do today is how to draw a hand. And hands are one of those parts of the body that when people go to try to draw it, they tend to have difficulty. Usually it's like hands, feet, and noses that are like the hardest thing for people to draw. So I'm going to be sharing a method that I kind of created for myself when I was in 7th grade, drawing on the side of my notes in class, because it should be something that is really easy to follow along with. And it does actually incorporate some solid art principles that I didn't even know I was doing at the time. So without further ado, the only things that you are going to need in order to do this project is a piece of paper of any kind. When I was in 7th grade, I used line paper. You can use printer paper so it's nice and clean. And then some sort of pencil. It can be a standard pencil. It could be a mechanical pencil. We're not going to be getting too deep into the art supplies. If you have better art supplies at home, like an actual sketchbook and actual drawing pencils, absolutely feel free to use them. I'm just trying to make this particular first video as accessible for everyone to be able to do right away as possible. So let's get into how to draw a hand with the most basic tools. All right, everybody, here is my printer paper, and this is the pencil I'm going to be using. Anyone who is used to doing artistic projects will be like, oh no, not a mechanical pencil, anything but a mechanical pencil. Why are you doing this? And the reason why I'm doing this is because not everybody has access to the art supplies. Sometimes they can be expensive, so we're just starting at a very basic ground level. For those of you who don't know why artists would be like, oh, why are you using a mechanical pencil? It is because when you have drawing pencils, you have access to a bunch of different densities in graphite, and you can get much more dynamic shading tones. So when you're using just one pencil and it's a mechanical pencil, you only have one type of shading tone to work with, so the end result will not be as dynamic. But that's okay because we're just trying to create a basic drawing here. So when you're getting started, your first step is you're going to choose which hand you're going to draw. And I suggest to start off, you choose whichever is your non-dominant hand to draw. So if you are right-handed, you're going to want to draw your left hand. If you're left-handed, you're going to want to draw your right hand. And the reason for that is that whichever hand is dominant can still be drawing while you're looking at your other hand as a template so that you can see the lines and the shadows. So what you're first going to do is whichever hand you are going to not be drawing, your dominant hand, you are going to trace it onto the page. This is the least artistic piece of this entire drawing, where you don't really do a lot of tracing of your own body in drawing usually, but it's a really good starting point. If you don't have a starting point, let's get my hand actually in the frame. That would be great. All right, so whichever hand you are going to be using as your dominant hand, or is your dominant hand. I say that because I'm actually ambidextrous, so I can do both. It's okay if your pencil bounces while you're tracing. We're going to clean up these lines in just a minute. When I'm doing this, usually my pencil gets a little stuck on a finger here or there, and so the lines will not look particularly neat. You don't need to go super heavy with these lines because, like I said, we're going to be cleaning them up in just a minute. But when you're done, you're going to have the general outline of your hand. Now, at the moment, it doesn't look too good. That's because it's really bouncy and jagged. So your next step is you are going to be cleaning up those lines and erasing the bad parts, which is why you shouldn't draw your lines super hard. So you're going to find a section that is really bouncy, like the tip of this finger here, and you're just going to redraw that line, but smooth out the edges of it. Nothing too drastic. And then you're going to just erase out the bits that are definitely not right. And if you erase too far, just draw it back in. And you're going to do that for every part of the outline that is not a solid one. Okay, once you're done, it will look something like this, and we just need to add the wrist back in. So you can put your hand back on top of your tracing, and you can see where your wrist is. And once again, just kind of trace out that shape a little bit. And this is when we learned that I have the hand size of a small child still, despite being an adult. I know my wrist sizes are right here. All right. It doesn't have to be perfect yet. We're just working on it. All right. So now, voila, you have the basic shape of a hand, but we technically haven't really been drawing much of anything yet because we've just traced outlines and cleaned up the edges. So here is where the magic starts to happen, where we start turning this tracing into something that actually looks like a real hand. The entire time you are going to be looking at the hand that you are tracing. If I can zoom my camera out a little, that's my direction. Whoop, that's my light. I need a lighting setup. Alright. So the entire time you're going to be looking at your non-dominant hand to give you tracing guidelines. And I'm actually going to borrow that light to show you what I mean by looking at the shadows. So when you have a hand that you're drawing, there is going to be shadows depending on where the light is. So if I have the light more underneath my hand, you can see that there's only going to be a few places where the light actually catches on the hand because most of the lighting is blocked. If I have the light completely above my hand, then the shadows are very different. It all has to do with the shapes and the bend in your hand. And if you start changing the shape of your hand to different positions, then the way the lighting hits you will completely change. So very basic art principles right there. Okay, so looking at your hand, you are going to be focusing on one section of your hand at a time. So I will be starting over on the thumb side and then working across. And what we're doing at the moment is we are just noticing where the lines are, and we are going to be once again making kind of light lines on our drawing to show where the lines are on our actual hand. This is where our drawings are going to all look a little bit different because all of us will have different line markings on our palms. It's just one of those neat parts about being human. So with the thumb, you will notice that your thumb kind of is split into two sections by the lines on it. I'm sorry about my camera zooming in and out. So you are going to be roughly halfway down the length of the thumb drawing this bottom line, and then just a little bit above it, draw the next line, and then wherever your lines hit close to the actual hand portion of your hand, you are going to be drawing those in. So that's where things are going to start looking a little bit different, but everybody has that first line about halfway down. So looking at my hand, trying to keep it at an angle that it would be for the picture, I'm going to look about halfway down the thumb, very light line to show that first line, and then a little bit above it, draw that little curve. You'll notice that my lines are not going the whole way across. Trust me, it will look better in time. Whenever you're doing a drawing, it will always look a little bit more messy at the beginning and less realistic than when you get done. All right, moving on to the pointer finger. You have a line that is going to be at the very base of the finger, and then after that, it gets split into almost perfect thirds. So about halfway up, there's going to be another line, and usually this is where there's like a cluster of lines, and then for the fingertip, another line there. Remember, you're not going super hard with these lines because they're going to be modified a little bit once we get into, oh, that wasn't quite high enough. See, draw lightly so you can erase well. They're going to be modified slightly once we start getting into the real details phase. This is just giving us a nice little outline. All right. So now that I have the fingers done, that is the part that's going to be the most universal. Now you're going to actually be looking at the lines on your actual hand. So for me, I have a line that goes from my pointer over here all the way down and across and a type of angle. So I'm going to draw that in. And normally you don't want to like do those types of strokes. They're called hairy lines. But like I said, later we're going to be cleaning things up. So it's okay if I do that a little bit. My next line, I kind of have like this M-ish shape in the middle. And there's like this Y here. So I'm going to draw that little Y going on. And then there's this top line. Kind of separates my knuckle a little bit. Draw that through. A little Y here. Lots of little Y's. A straight line. Last end of the M shape. Curvature of the thumb. Curvature of the palm. And then these really great bendy lines right at the bottom of my hand. Wrist wrinkles. All right, so this should be now for you looking a little bit more like an actual hand because you're starting to draw in all these fine lines that are what make a hand special and unique. On and a few more. All right, so looks a little bit more like a hand now. What we're going to do to actually finalize these lines and give our picture actual dimension is we are going to be doing some shading. When you're doing shading, your general rule of thumb is you draw heaviest where the shadow is, and then you don't press as hard when you get to the lighter areas so that they are, in fact, lighter. Once again, we're doing this kind of like in steps and layers, so it is still not going to fully look like a normal hand. Now, I'm going to be drawing my hand kind of like this, where if the light was coming perfectly down on top of my hand, where the shadows are going to be more at the edges of everything because the light is coming down from on top of my hand because of the light underneath my camera. It's getting skewed a little bit because I also have a light in front of the drawing to make the paper show up a little bit better. But I'm going to be doing that very top-down light thing. So I'm going to be pressing harder at the edge of the finger and then slowly releasing the pressure as I move across. And then once I get to the other side, I'm going to start pressing a little harder to make that deeper shadow. So once again, this is just a very basic, like level 1 shading way of doing things. There are way more better ways to shade in the future. The general principle, which is the whole moving heavier pressure to lighter pressure, will always be the same, but there's different techniques, different ways to do it, and different ways to blend your shading together so that it doesn't look like a bunch of lines. You are going to go back into those lines that you made and you're going to darken them and you're going to make them a lot more crisp. in preparation for the next step when we do the form of blending that we're going to be working on. And so once again, I'm going to be doing every single finger, and then I'm going to be working on the palm. I'm going to do the shading of the fingers in silence and play some music over it for your entertainment. All right, so now that the fingers are done, we need to shade in the palm. The palm is going to be a little bit more interesting towards the shading because when you're looking at your actual hand, there are parts of your hand that are higher up than the center. You kind of have like a bowl in the center of your hand. The muscle around the thumb joint here is raised up a little bit. The side of your palm is raised up a little bit. And then each of your knuckles are raised up a little bit. So because of that, when you're shading, you're going to end up having these shading shadow valleys along the edges of those shapes. Normally I wouldn't do the shadow valleys first like this, but I'm trying to do it to help you see with all the other lines that I have on here. So that's roughly where your shadow valleys are going to be on your hand, depending on where you choose to do your lighting from. If you're doing it from the top like me, it will be nice and clear in the middle like that. So what you're going to do is you're going to be shading on a curve. So your knuckle, you're going to have a curved shadow. And then you are going to shade up from the bottom to your highlight point and then down into the joint of the finger. For the side of the hand, you're going to just shade it like you did before with the fingers. With the top portion, you're going to shade into the middle and not go dark again, because if you're looking at your hand, this part of the shape just kind of blends in together a little bit. So you're not going to overly pronounce that finger joint. Then for the thumb, you're going to be shading on the curve here. So you're going to be darkest along the edge of that curve, reaching up to a highlight point where the light is really hitting that part of the hand, and then come along the other side. Join the end of the palm. And then for the space in the middle, what you're going to do is you're going to shade from that last side portion that you had left all the way across, keeping a fairly even tone, as long as you're using the same lighting source. Otherwise, go with what your light source is doing for your hand. Keep looking at that hand, keep holding it at the same place in the light so that you have a consistent form of shading. Then we need to go back in and once again firm up all those lines that we had underneath, using some nice dark strokes. You can always look back at your hand if you don't remember if you can't see your lines anymore because your shading went a little too dark over it, that's fine. for doing this part of the palm, I am actually kind of purposefully doing what I said before is called the hairy line, where I'm continually going back. And that's because if you look closer at my hand, or maybe even at your own, my camera will focus on the right hand, you'll see that the lines aren't straight, and that's because of the way the skin all goes together. So for me, I feel like it looks a little bit more realistic when you're putting these lines in if you use a hairy line instead of a very good straight line. Almost done putting my lines back in. All right, so now we have our lines back in. The last part that we have to shade in is our wrist, and you're going to be using the same type of method where you are going to be shading from the outside to the inside, and you are going to be putting a deeper shadow at the base of your wrist because your hand will be slightly higher than the actual wrist itself. My goodness, my veins are very prominent. And honestly, my veins are often quite prominent, so sometimes when I'm doing this method to draw a hand, I will actually draw in the veins because I have very thick veins in my arms, apparently. They're very evident most of the time. Doctors love me. It's a family trait. I can't explain it. So if you have very thick veins like me that show up very easily, you can absolutely draw them in too if you want, or you can leave them out if you don't. Some of the fun of art is you can take liberty with what you want. Alright, and then I'm going to redraw in my wrist lines a little bit. My wrist wrinkles. Alright, refirm up that shadow. Alright, so now we have something that looks like this. It looks a lot more like a real hand, but it's still not quite really there. So the last step that we're going to do is actually a very commonly used art practice called subtraction. So what you're going to do is you're going to be using the eraser side of your pencil, and you're essentially going to be erasing everything that you did with intention. So what you're going to be doing is wherever the highlight is, you are going to be very lightly erasing. So see, there is still color left. And then you're just really lightly erasing across the entire thing so that your shading stays in place. And it just blends together all of the shading that you did so that it gets rid of all those really sharp pencil lines, especially when you're using a mechanical pencil like I'm using. You get really fine lines that cover the entire drawing because the point of your pencil is so sharp. So you just very lightly go over the whole thing with the eraser. All right, so you can see that I actually went a little too hard on the erasing on some parts, but that's one of the beauties of working with pencil. We can just really lightly go back in with just a little bit more pencil and then erase a little bit more. If you were genuinely doing this technique, you would be using a completely different eraser and you would be applying it a little bit different. For one, it would be a much bigger eraser because you're still going to be getting some lines built in because of the fact that the eraser is so small on the end of the pencil. But this is a really good starting point to get you into some more realistic looking hand drawings, and you can impress people with the fact that it looks more like a realistic hand. This is actually the reason why these pencils became one of my favorites, because with doing this in my notebook all the time, it's called a twist erase. You can actually buy replacement erasers, and I was going through a lot of erasers doing this. So this is not a photorealism tutorial. This is you want to get some basic art skills type tutorial. So at the end of it, you should have a hand that looks somewhat like your actual hand, and maybe you can show it off to your friends because you're excited about it. I hope you had a lot of fun learning how to draw a hand today. If you did complete the project, I would love to see the work that you created. Please either tag me on Instagram with it or DM it to me through Instagram or go to my Facebook page and submit it there so that I can see the work that you did. This whole section of the channel is all about building community around these projects, so I would really like to see what you did. If you have particular projects that you would like to work on in the future, please leave them in the comments below. And that is pretty much it for this first Create video. So please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. And have a great one until the next one.